Welcome here to a very special conversation here on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora inside of the Heritage Hill Studios. We appreciate you being here with us Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time worldwide. And, of course, inside of the Heritage Hill Studios, big time thanks to Heritage Hill Brewhouse out in Pompey on 3149 Sweet Road in the country, God's country. I call it God's paintbrush out there with the landscape that you get to see. And, of course, Heritage Hill North, which is so close to Syracuse Hancock International Airport and so many pieces of our beautiful community on 628 South Main Street in North Syracuse, right there at the historic Sweetheart Corner. So here inside of the Heritage Hill Studios, it is my true honor and privilege. You know my coverage of the American Athletic Conference. Over a decade, before a logo, before a name, have been with this conference, and I am so grateful for the way that they have treated me for so long. It is really true that you work with people, you work very closely with people that you enjoy talking to, that you respect, and that are just fun to work with. People work with people that they like. And I have had the privilege of working with the American Athletic Conference since the beginning, and now I am here with the privilege of welcoming their second commissioner ever in their history, Tim Pernetti, to the broadcast, and looking forward to building on this next era with the American Athletic Conference. So with that being said, Tim, how are we doing today?
Yeah, doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. And Tim, you know, I got to talk with you when there was the initial Zoom call where the media could be a part of it and just get to know you a little bit better. But it was a really quick conversation, so I'm looking forward to this one today. I'd love to go back to the beginning for you. And as a kid, what really just brought you to sports? What kind of inspired you to be connected to sports going back to your childhood and just what it was for you that really made you feel like you wanted to be part of it?
Well, I think like any kid, sports, plays a role at some point. Like either plays a recreational role or it becomes something different. And to me, it was just something that was part of growing up. I grew up one of three brothers, and I'm the middle. And, we were constantly playing sports. And it became just a hugely important part of the experience growing up. And over time, you sort of gravitate to certain things that you're more interested in than others. And the one rule of thumb we had was that you had to play multiple sports. And I think that was a great, experience because you really put the sports aside. It's the relationships, that really came through to me, and how you can learn how to deal with people and deal with challenging situations and all of that stuff. But, for me, it was always part of growing up. And as I got older, I suddenly, I don't think I ever thought of it, but suddenly in high school, I started to get recruiting letters. And I didn't expect that either. And suddenly it opened my eyes to the fact that maybe I could, get an education by utilizing my, sport ability. So the reason I wanted to be in the business was really because of that. Sport gave me the opportunity to get an education, when quite frankly, my family couldn't afford it, at the time. And it gave me an experience that was probably the hardest thing that I ever did, playing Division I football, but also created, lasting relationships, and also gave me the opportunity to understand how to do a lot of different things in my life, from manage your time to deal with adversity to you name it. So being back in this role is to some extent, it's a little ironic because I've had so many different roles, luckily, in college sports. But this one in particular has always been something I've been interested in doing. And, being part of a conference like this, given all the opportunity that it has ahead of it, is really exciting. I'm just chomping at the bit.
And like you said, I mean, your history and your connection to the sports world and just what it could bring you, I can hear in your voice the excitement, and that excitement is still there. And I tell people all the time, I do what I love and I love what I do, so I don't see it as a job. Why, through all of these years, from your childhood spirit to now keeping that childhood spirit with you as an adult, why is sports still invigorating for you? Why is it still exciting? Why are you still in love with it?
There's so much surrounding us right now that is predictable in life. There's always unknowns, but there's things that are predictable. And I think even from how I learned, like my first experience in the business coming out of graduate school was in television. And, I worked at ABC Sports. Ironically, I worked right across the hall from Tony Petitti, who was running programming at the time. And I learned the deal-making business. But we were deciding and determining with certainty what people were going to watch and when. And the thing that really just grabbed me out of the gate about working in the sports business was two words: unscripted drama. Like there's so much about it that people like, whether it's you or it's writers in the markets or it's the talking heads on the radio, can speculate and think about and dissect and predict and, almost to the point of saying this is going to happen when you actually don't know, like that anything is possible. And the beauty of it for me is that in particular, like there's so much about it that we can plan for and ready for and predict, but you don't know what's going to happen. And I think that's why collegiate athletics in general has created this massive affinity. It's why there's so much donors and alumni and fans and supporters, and even residents of certain states where there's an institution that maybe didn't even attend, right? It's there because it's the unpredictability of it that is so exciting to people. And in this day and age, this sort of anything is possible is attractive. Like we're in a business of collegiate athletics, but we're also in the business of entertainment. And I do think that type of thing really resonates with people.
Yeah, and I think it's such a interesting way of looking at it, of saying, we live in a world where, that the unknown is exciting, not knowing what's going to happen in a game, this unscripted thing that we have in our lives. And it's called so many, and I say this all the time, in a world that has become maybe more and more distant, where like strangers may not talk to each other and you may walk by somebody in a park and not smile and say hello, that the sports world still connects that. It's this world where you can sit at a bar, you can be a Yankee fan, and you're sitting there watching the game, you start screaming at the TV, and the person next to you starts screaming at the TV. They say something, you say something. You go, oh, yeah, man, this guy, I agree with that. We should have traded him. And then you go, oh, yeah, I love Juan Soto. Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah, I hope we figure this thing out. And then years later, that person is the best man at your wedding. That's what sports does. And I feel like it's so incredible that one conversation at one place at one time with a total stranger, sports can turn those people into your husbands, your wives, your best friends, and the people that you rely on the most. It brings people together in the professional world, business-wise. Sports has this just fluid way of taking a detached world and keeping it connected. So to your point, Tim, I feel like sports is one of those things that when the world might change for the not so good, there's still that purity and that honesty and that connection that sports provides, that nobody else can do it quite that way.
I completely agree. There's a real comfortable intimacy in being a fan of a certain sport or a certain team. And where college separates itself from every professional sport is like, you could think about following an NFL team or an NBA team or a Major League Baseball team. And maybe you're interested in that team because of a specific player that you love. When that player gets traded or signs a contract as a free agent somewhere else, you may follow along. But like colleges and universities, fans don't trade their school. That's the reality. They do not trade their school. They're loyal to it through thick and thin, no matter what happens. They'll always have an opinion, things to say, right? That's an important part of it. But it brings people together. And I think if you look historically, even at this country and what's happened, like even in my recent memory, think about how tragic everything was in and around where I grew up, the area of New Jersey, around 9/11. Yeah. What brought people back together after 9/11? Sports did. And it's happened around, major world wars and other things. Like sports was the thread that gave everybody the outlet or the distraction to be able to enjoy something that took their mind off things that, quite frankly, just add stress to our lives. Right? I'm not saying that sports doesn't. Like, you think about fans and their teams, like, they're stressed about winning and success and recruiting and the transfer portal and all of these things. But the reality is, it brings people together. I always tell the same story. I had the opportunity once in my life last year to go to the Masters. And I went with my two sons who are in their 20s. We all love golf. And you check your phone. There's no phones allowed on the course. And I thought to myself, God, what a social experiment this is. Yeah. And I met hundreds of people who were following different golfers, but there was such a common thread in the reason everyone was there, the affinity they had for the event and the sport. And that's not something that you'll really find anywhere else in the world.
No, there's this passion, there's this love and this connection And it is. I mean, it is so much fun. And the people that you meet and the personalities that are there. And we'll go back to your history and we'll kind of Tarantino this thing. But I do want to get to the American Athletic. When we talk about personalities, we talk about people. The American Athletic Conference last season became the biggest it had ever been overall, and the biggest it had ever been when you look at the football side of things. 15 members, 14 in football, and with SMU departing and Army coming in for football only, we're seeing that this number stays the same. 15 overall when you look at Wichita State, that is in the conference for everything but football, Navy, and Army that are in for football only, and then everybody else, it's a full-time member of the American Athletic Conference. This has blossomed into the biggest it's been, and the teams that are there, the institutions that are there, I've gotten to meet people and talk with people, and it's really an eclectic group of this melting pot of America, which really embodies the name The American. I would love to get your thoughts on when you look across all of the institutions that call the American home now, with the 6 that came in last year, with Army coming in and in football now and joining Navy and having 2/3 of those military schools. And I always say Army, I look at Army, I look at Navy, I always say Air Force, you're on alert right now that the American's going to give you a phone call. But when we look at the American Athletic Conference today, Tim, what are we talking about with the caliber of membership that you have?
We're talking about a high caliber membership. I think that despite the fact that, this conference, and you've covered it from before it was even a conference, has seen various versions of itself, it's the most resilient conference in America. No question about it. And the membership that we have today really represents great markets. It represents a lot of the strength of the entire industry in collegiate athletics. It represents premium brands. And like you said, we're expanding to add new members that bring real value and real affinity to the conference. Early in my career, when I did the CSTV startup, we pursued the TV rights for Army and Navy football for one reason: national, if not international brands. It brings you a massive audience. And the experience, and I was, even as a college athlete, I got to play in both of those stadiums. The experience of Army and Navy football is different. It hits a little bit different. Even as a player, I remember just fighting the guy across the line from me for 4 quarters and then standing behind him during their alma mater thinking he is going to get deployed. He's going to go off to a battle. He's going to protect the freedom of this country. It's just different. So as we're expanding, we are bringing more value and higher profile and more affinity to the conference. But this is, make no mistake about it, there's a way about the American Athletic Conference. I said in the meeting the other day, there's the American way. As cliche as that sounds, but there's real power in this league, and it is a resilient league, and I think we have proved that for the last decade.
Yeah, and seeing that, and I appreciate you making mention of that, the conference from the beginning of the beginning. I mean, I've seen this, I've talked about it numerous times, that this conference, before it had its name and its logo, it was left with Temple returning and UConn. So there's your Northeast, because it was that old Big East. And then there's Cincinnati and South Florida, which really didn't make sense to people that, well, this isn't the Big East. This isn't Northeast football. And that's what it was. I mean, it could essentially have been Mike Oresco and the team could have said, hey, okay, you know what? Big East is gone. The Catholic 7 took the name. They took the logo. We don't have much to build with here. We got 3 teams here and Temple coming in. Let's just, call it a wash and move on. Mike will go do something else and everybody else will do this and that. But they pushed through it. They thrived through it. They didn't survive through it, in my opinion. They thrived through it. And we see the American rise like the Phoenix, and then realignment happens, and you lose Syracuse, and you lose Pitt, and you lose Louisville, and then you see this rising again through that, and to have the additions that come in, and then there's another pull with UCF, there's a pull with Houston, there's a pull with Cincinnati, and then 6 come in with 3 going out, then SMU says we're going to the ACC, and then Army comes in. I mean, essentially we're talking about a story that is a little bit over a decade of not rising like the Phoenix once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. So when you talk about this, I love hearing that from the commissioner of this conference, that echoing of my thoughts and my sentiments of this conference, that it has never said die, it has never given up, and I don't think that there, arguably in this nation, there is no conference in America through realignment that has been more battle tested and has proven itself every single time more than the American Athletic Conference.
Couldn't agree more. And our focus is on the road ahead.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of opportunities on the road ahead for this conference. One of the things that was very important as I went through the process and got to spend all this just incredible time with the presidents was I really pushed, to try to figure out if we could find a room of people that were willing to think differently and take some big swings. And doing things differently starts with creating alignment in the room. And that I really pressed that button multiple times. And it occurred to me that we really had a group that was thinking innovatively and about how to do things differently and trying to be a first mover in certain categories. And that really is the most exciting part about the job.
And when we look at the membership and we talk about the American, first and foremost, I think it's the right name because you and I have learned over time, Tim, that you don't have an identifier of your conference of a region and you never put a number next to it, not in realignment. And so when you look at where we are right now in the American, it essentially means that anybody in the United States of America can be a part of this conference, and the conference now has membership in the states of Alabama, New York, North Carolina, Florida, Tennessee, Maryland, Texas, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Kansas. What does that say to you?
It says it's a hell of a footprint. That's what it says. You're in multiple time zones. You're in markets that are significant in their affinity for collegiate athletics, how they support the institutions, the size as it relates to television households. Like it has a lot going for it. It really does. And the important part for us will be to build on that foundation, right? That's the most important thing. To think about, the assets that we have and then how we build on the foundation, Dan, right? And I think there's a lot of opportunities that are there. And with some of these things already out there, people are talking about, what happens next. Private capital, jersey patches, naming rights to a conference, what's out there. I'm encouraged that people are talking about it. Right, because it doesn't mean you're going to do these things, but I think talking about it is a sign of the times. As we're looking down the barrel of the House settlement and things changing in student-athlete compensation, I think student-athletes are now our partners in everything that we do. And in order to be partners, we have to create more value for everyone. But it starts with just talking about these things. I think in the past, people didn't want to talk about it because they didn't totally understand it. But now there's a more important time than ever to really dive in, talk about things, and understand it.
Here with Tim Pernetti, the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora inside of the Heritage Hill Studios. Tim, as you said, we're in a place right now where there's at least a conversation, not necessarily that everything's going to happen within the conversation, but that we have it. Name, image, and likeness, the transfer portal, there's and obviously realignment where there is no geographical identifier for a lot of places anymore. There are conferences that will play in-conference games against opponents that are over 3,000 miles away if you were to drive over 32 hours of driving. So in the current state of collegiate athletics, when you've talked about it today and when you've talked about it when we were on the call a couple months back, you sound positive and you sound excited at a time where a lot of people are scared and wondering if this enterprise that they call it can survive. When we look at NIL and we look at the transfer portal and we look at, getting Congress involved and everything that can kind of come of what's happening right now along with realignment, where does your positive nature come from at a time where a lot of people are seeing this as very chaotic?
Well, it's just kind of who I am, and who I've always been. And I was really surrounded by so many great people when I was a young executive in the sports business that I was able to, to learn from. And then you have to sort of take good things from certain people. You have to see the bad things and realize you would never do it. And then you have to form your own style. But, the one thing that I've been fortunate to be part of, like multiple opportunities, launching a pro, an MLS team, an NYCFC, working on campus at Rutgers, where I went to school and played football, doing a startup TV network. I had the opportunity to be involved in exciting things, but they were chaotic. Like, there's never more chaos than I was in any of those things. And what I learned is within the chaos is where there is the most opportunity. So the reason I'm excited is, like, the industry in collegiate athletics has been slow moving to change. I think everybody knows that. But now more than ever, it has to accelerate change in order to be able to figure out how to structure this in a way that's going to work for everyone. And by the way, put the one thing at the center that was the reason this thing was designed in the beginning, which was education through sport, creating a great experience for young people. And when you think about conference expansion and some of the insane geography that's going on around some of this stuff, like the hard part for me to swallow is student athlete experience. Like, to me, as we look at our league, composition, expansion, that will be a priority to make sure that student athlete experience is the best it possibly can be. And I do think geography, is tied to that, to some extent. So we need to think about those things. But the excitement is, like, when you think about how the industry can move forward and you think about how it can be modernized, and some of the risks that we can take or the ideas that we put out there, it's exciting. It doesn't mean any of them will ever happen, but it is interesting to actually apply experiences we've had, or I've had in particular, in taking risks in other places and how they played out. I mean, think about taking risk is you got to do it and realize that 50% of the time you're going to be wrong. But if you don't do it, then it's just sort of like definition of insanity day after day. And I don't think that's where the industry is at anymore.
No, and when you discuss this and you look at the American Athletic Conference right now, we're back to mega conferences. There are conferences that are at 18, are at 16, in your case at 15. So, living in that world of like 15 to 18, 14 to 18, where is the American heading? Are you being advantageous in the thought of adding more full-time members or looking at associate-type members like Army and Navy when it comes to football? What is the thought process of the world of expansion for the American under your leadership?
We'll be aggressive and proactive. Those are the most important words to remember. It starts with, these things, I think, in a lot of cases, certain moves have happened in a methodical manner, and other moves have been reactive. So the important thing for us to do as a conference is start with a criteria. What are the things that are important to us as a conference as it relates to the future of the membership? And, expansion can't just be about new membership. Expansion needs to be about creating value for everyone, right? If you think about a conference, like take XYZ conference with 10 members that's created $500 million in value. You don't just expand and bring a new member in because you think they may be a fit for certain things and not others. What value can they bring you in the future? So as you build the enterprise and you reach your next big sponsorship discussion or media rights discussion or whatever it is, that you're generating enough value to pay for that additional member and create more value for the existing membership that's created most of it on their back. So, that's important as well. I think markets, like I said earlier, we have great markets in this conference. So markets will be a factor, but we're sort of like our criteria right now, we have an idea of some of the things that are hugely important, but it's still a little bit of a piece of clay, and we will figure out what's important as we approach the space, but we're going to be proactive, and I'm encouraged by some of the outreach that we've gotten that's come in our direction to learn more about what we're doing in the future. So, with that, we'll just continue to be smart about what we think makes sense for the conference in the future. And I think the hard part will be, but for everyone, is being disciplined to that criteria that you create that you think works for you, because it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah, and the loyalty factor has been something that's gone away. A team joining a conference and then a little bit down the road leaving for another. So what do you do in that respect? Because it seems like you live in a world, and I live in a world, where a handshake is supposed to mean something. When you look somebody in the eye, it's supposed to mean something. There was a time in the history of America where you shook somebody's hand and you told them, this is what I'm going to do, and you didn't even sign a piece of paper. You just took that handshake and said, I have to do it because I'm going to honor my commitment to my word. And Floyd Little, good friend of mine, God rest in peace, to him up in heaven. Floyd, the first day that I was around him, I'll never forget this. He said, "Your word is the most valuable thing you own. If you don't keep your word, you have no value." And so in a world where there is this constant change, when you're looking at expansion and you're looking at your membership, what is the conference doing as far as trying to find that loyalty? Do you feel like the loyalty is there among your membership currently is the first part? And the second part is the American looking at signing agreements with current members and future members that would make it more difficult to just exit?
So the answer on is there trust in the room is yes, there is. And for me personally, like that was a huge, important piece of the discussion, and even considering the opportunity, and taking a shot at trying to be hired into the job. So I feel like it's there. At the same time, I don't think expansion and what else is out there needs to be a dirty word. Like Ed Scott gets asked his first day at Memphis about this, and he gives a point of view about what's out there. It doesn't need to be something that people pretend they're not discussing or pretend is not going on in the background, right? My counsel across the board to our presidents and ADs is like, let's just be open with each other about it, right? Like, let's have an open discussion, because the reality is every time media contracts and the cycles come around, expansion becomes a thing. So expansion will always be a thing, and it's probably never going to end. But rather than everybody operating in the shadows, if we're more transparent about it, then it gives everyone, including a conference where a member is potentially departing, a chance to thoughtfully plan for what's next versus reacting your way through it. And that's a situation that nobody wants to be in. So as it relates to all of that, I feel great about the room. I really do. And I think ADs and presidents talking openly about expansion is fine. It's good, right? It's a reality of what's going on around us. As it relates to the future, creating alignment, Dan, and creating sort of a consensus-driven culture in this conference will be my first priority, because the reality is when I got into the industry, it was very collegial, and trust and relationships mattered. And I think it's time to reinforce that, more than anything. As it relates to what we'll do and, documents and all that stuff, like I can't get into the detail of that, but there's a lot of things that we're talking about to try to make sure that we're all in the boat together, rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, and when you look at, because there's all the conversation in the ACC with the grant of rights agreement and this, that, and the third. And when we look at the media rights that you have for the American Athletic Conference and that longstanding partnership with ESPN and then some other pieces that have come with it, you've made mention of working at CBS and working at ABC and your experience there. How does your experience in the broadcast network world and in the things that you've done and achieved in that world, how does that help this conference as its leader to move forward as far as making sure that you're getting to as many households as you can, as easily as you can, and that there is money going back into your institutions?
I think the creativity of it all will be a benefit. I had the opportunity to really learn it in the traditional sense, working at ABC Sports at a network where we, quite frankly, had and controlled the rights to most of the major conferences at that time, and created the BCS, when we were there. Like, I learned it in the traditional sense, and then went off and did a startup where, as a startup, access to rights is harder. So you had to get more creative and convince conferences and universities that some of the product that had been acquired but was being warehoused essentially and not being televised deserved to see the light of day. And you got creative in how you delivered it. Like, you're in a network that had limited households, but the ones that didn't get it, you would come up with a streaming strategy, right? And as you fast forward 20 years to now, it's an unbelievable time to be in the content providing business. If you own live sports rights, you are on a great path towards more value and more growth. And all you have to do is look at the last 7 to 10 years and see what the growth has been in these cycles in collegiate athletics for media agreements. The second part of it that's exciting is you don't necessarily have to choose one over the other. Like, there are more conferences that have developed a strategy to put together multiple packages to broaden their distribution to more audiences on a variety of outlets and distribution platforms. That in particular, I think, is exciting. And I've had experience being around all of that. So, between that and just relationships in the industry with all the decision makers that are deciding where and when to acquire these rights, I'm hopeful I can bring some of that to our conference, and that will benefit the entire membership.
Before I let you go, Tim Pernetti, Commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, here on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora inside of the Heritage Hill Studios. We have seen the Pac-12 dissolving, but I tell people this. I said, if you were like me and you grew up with a mom that watched soap operas and told you after school that you could either watch General Hospital or watch nothing, you know that something's not dead. Even if it looks like it's dead, it's not necessarily dead. And so, that Pac name and all of that, I still think something will happen on the West Coast at some point. I feel like that is maybe not too far away. But when you look at the quote-unquote power, Mike Oresco and I spoke a lot about, the P6 and a power conference and not liking the group of five name and feeling that the American had done enough in the classroom, had done enough on the fields and the courts and the tracks and the pools of life to rise up and won championships and put themselves in positions with drafted players and whatnot to be in the power conversation. With the Pac not being there, with Oregon State and Washington State being in the West Coast Conference and working out a deal with the Mountain West, but really being in limbo and the splitting up of the Pac-12, there was that conversation of now a Power 4. But the American, in my opinion, and I'm not saying this because you're on the show with me and you know this, the American, to me, has done factual things to be in the power conversation. So where does the AAC sit now with the membership, with what you're doing in the classroom, with what's happening in athletics? Where, as we step forward in the enterprise and we talk about the SEC and the Big Ten and the Big 12 and the ACC and so on and so forth, where do you see the American within the conversations and at the table when we're talking about the future of the enterprise and the future of American collegiate athletics?
Well, what I can tell you from my experience so far is that we're in the conversation. The vibe in the CFP rooms with my colleague commissioners that oversee conferences that are competing in football is great. Like, it really is. It's productive. People listen to each other. And, while there are certain results that came out of the last round of CFP negotiations that are challenging for some in the group of five, everybody agreed to move forward with these terms because they know that it's the best case scenario for college football at this time. So, as it relates to the conversation, we're in the conversation. And whether it's in the room at the CCA with all the commissioners across the industry or in the CFP room. And I do think relationships will win the day. And these are important. Like I mentioned, I go way back with most of the commissioners in that room, and the ones that I'm just getting to know, the relationships have already hit, a tremendous groove. So that's important. As it relates to where we stand, P4, I just don't get caught up in that stuff. What the media calls it, what the monitors are, this sort of culture of relegation, all I'm telling you is we're not going to accept it. On that, I don't get caught up in, what people call who and everything else. Our job's to focus on what we control, and I don't control that. But, as it relates to this sort of hovering culture of relegation, we don't accept it, and we won't accept it in the future.
So for you, going off of that, Tim, why are you the right leader right now for the American Athletic Conference? We've seen your history. You've mentioned some things about CBS and ABC. There's also IMG College, IMG Academy, the work that you did during COVID-19 with the WNBA to make sure that they had a home, as well as the conversation about the New York City Football Club in 2015, launching that franchise, being at Rutgers, returning to your alma mater where you had played football and helping them in their move to the Big Ten. So you've been a part of expansion. You've been a part of realignment. You've seen so many pieces of the sports and entertainment world from so many unique angles. So I can sit here and say what I see in you as a leader and in your resume that looks like this. Honestly, Tim, it looks like you're probably 106 years old at this point because of the work that you've done. But my question to you is very plainly, why are you the right leader for the American right now?
Well, some days, after all the 4th and 1 plays where I had to be at the goal line and dig a hole for a running back, my body feels like 106 a lot of days. But thankfully, I'm not that number. Listen, that's a tough question to answer. I think that's a question better suited for the presidents that agreed to put their chips behind me. But the one thing I will tell you is, like, and thank you for that glowing review of my resume. Like, I've had so much fun in all of these roles, but I also have failed way more than I succeeded in things. You know, like, yes, I was able to get Rutgers in the Big Ten. That was one of the things that I actually went there to do and became obsessed with and sacrificed everything of myself personally and professionally to do it. And I also lost my job there. You know, as part of another situation with a basketball coach. So, you know, I have failed way more than I've had successes. So I think the only way I would answer it is the way I answered it in the room, because a couple of the presidents asked me that. And what I said to them was, I've been through all this chaos. And the reason it's relevant is because given where we're at as an industry, you need someone that's battle tested. It's never been more important. And I do think outside of all the things that I have been fortunate to be part of, which none of them I did on my own, I did them with other people, right? You may get credit for things, but it always takes an army of people to do it. But being battle tested, I think, is one of the most important traits given everything that's happening right now, because, you know, in those rooms and in those discussions and when you're thinking strategy, like, it is a little bit like approaching a battle. And if you're not battle tested and have been knocked around a little bit and being able to figure out a way to be responsive and resilient to that, I think it's a hard industry to be part of.
Amen. And I can agree with that wholeheartedly, right? We only learn from adversity. We don't learn from just a smooth sailing thing. You learn who you are through the chaos. You learn who you are through dealing with that. And the more you deal with that stuff, the more you deal with the tornadoes and the craziness of life, the more battle tested you become. The more battle tested you become, the more you realize that God doesn't put you through bad things. He puts you through opportunities to learn lessons, and the knowledge and wisdom that you gain from that, you almost enjoy it. And Tim, I don't know how you feel about it at this point, but I tell people, I go, when you throw me in the fire now, or you try to push me in the fire, I smile, because I'm like the Hulk. The more you put me in the fire, the bigger I get. So I used to get upset about it, but now I smirk at it. I'm like, oh, if I'm going in the fire, that means I'm coming out stronger. So y'all are going to have to understand that it's going to be a different world when I come out. And you keep pushing me in, I'm going to keep growing. So I don't know how you take it, but I like the fire now.
You can't say you didn't warn them. Right? You can't say you didn't warn them.
So final note here, we're going to play some rapid fire. It allows you the opportunity to ask the questions. You've been so gracious with answering mine, so I'm going to take I'm not going to put you on the hot seat for this. I'm just going to let you put me on the hot seat, because I don't know a time that a commissioner gets to ask the questions. So you get to ask me a couple here, Tim, anything in the world that you want to know, and I have to answer it. What is your first question?
Does the CFP expand beyond 12 teams?
Good question. I think, in my opinion, I feel like there's no point in winning a conference championship if you're not going to be represented. That's what they do for the NCAA tournament for men's and women's basketball. If you win your conference tournament, you get in. So I think expansion needs to happen in the CFP, in the sense of, if you're going to have all of these conferences in the FBS, if you win a conference championship, you should have a place. So am I happy that it's not 4 anymore? Absolutely, because I think it was disrespectful to a lot of things and a lot of conferences. And I think in the American alone, Houston, Cincinnati, not just in 1 year, but in 2, and UCF definitely had cases for themselves. So I would say, do I think it expands beyond 12? Yes, but I do not want it to expand in the sense of allowing 2 conferences automatic bids where everybody else is punished. I think that I've been very clear that the SEC, I said this 3 years ago, that the SEC, in my opinion, can become its own entity. I think the Big Ten took the West Coast teams so that they could join them. And I think if there's expansion to, let's say, 14, so that the Big Ten and the SEC champions will always have a bye, then you're really not changing anything. You're creating an unfair advantage. And it's no offense to those conferences. I think if they expand the CFP, which they should, that as much as there's an at-large opportunity, I don't think the Sun Belt and the American should be fighting each other for the rights to play on the road somewhere. I just don't think that that's fair to anyone. So my answer is yes, but it's yes based on people doing the right thing to create fairness in athletics that exists in other sports.
Same question related to the NCAA tournament. Do you see the NCAA tournament expanding beyond 64?
Tim, I love basketball. I played basketball growing up. I still play it to shut my brain off. I love the sport as much as I did when I was a kid. My answer to you is, yeah, I want the NCAA tournament to be like 3 months. I love the first day where you're watching 16 games and there's games from noon to midnight. I mean, that's my favorite time. If we could have the round of 64 over and over again, I would love it. So as a fan, yeah, I mean, I'd love to see expansion. But here's the reality of it. When you have 64 teams and 68 when it comes to the first four, so to speak, if you go beyond 68 and you go to 72, right, that's not really changing much. If you go to 80, this is what I'm telling you needs to change. It's not necessarily expansion. It's the way they handle it. And again, I'll go to my point that I made in the college football playoff. There's 32 conferences in men's Division I basketball. Of those 32 conferences, if you win your conference tournament, you have an automatic bid. But that's a lie, because not every conference has an automatic bid. Some of those conference champions have to play a play-in game. So when you tell the country you're in the NCAA tournament if you win your conference tournament, that's not the truth. I think what they need to do, whether they expand or not, is to, and I don't care if they make them 16 seeds, 10 seeds, 12, 14, whatever they want to do, but automatic bids should be automatic bids, and there's no conference tournament champion that should be put in a play-in game. If an at-large is essentially saying, these are the last 8 teams that we got in, these are the last 8 that we argued in to it, if they're the last 8 in, then they should be the ones playing in the first 4. There should be no automatic bids playing in the first 4. It's a disrespect. It's a lie to the model. And I think that if you're an at-large team that didn't win your conference tournament, you're going to play one of those first 4 games. So should there be expansion? Potentially. But what I'd really like to see, Tim, is that they stop punishing some of these conferences and telling their champions that they have to fight for the right just to be there in the round of 64.
Last one.
Yeah.
Best pizza place in Syracuse, New York.
Now you're going to get me in trouble.
You said it. You said I could put you on the spot, and you had to answer. So.
I know. No,
listen, if you want to punt it so you don't screw up your discount at whatever your favorite place is, I'm fine with that.
No, I'll tell you this. I have partnerships with a lot of them, but this is what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to truly rapid fire this. Avicoli's Margarita Pizza and Grandma's Pie, my favorite one there. At the Wildcat, sausage and pepperoni. At Pizza Man, it's the sweet heat with pepperoni, meatball, arugula, and Mike's Hot Honey. So if I'm going from each of my spots has a different type of pizza, but I love a little bit of spicy and a little bit of sweet, and that sweet heat is a game changer. And they were using Mike's Hot Honey before this movement of all these corporate companies and all this stuff using it. So I'm going to give credit to Pizza Man for meeting the owner and using their product well before we saw it all over the place. So I think answering your question, it's an honest answer, but it still doesn't get me in trouble, Tim. So that's good.
Oh, boy. Well played. Well, next time we do this, let's do it over, maybe we should do a little pizza tour and do some reviews.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy running around doing a lot of different things, but truly to be able to tell you, congratulations once again. Welcome to the American Athletic family. You know how much I care about this conference, and I am elated about the opportunity to grow in partnership with you professionally and personally, too, in that world as well. So thank you for your time and what you've done, and I can't thank you enough for taking the leadership of a conference that is very important to the collegiate landscape, and I know that you know that.
I appreciate it, Dan. We'll do this again soon.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Take care.